This video will cover how to send open invoices or unpaid invoices and address that campaign. This campaign will need some configuration before we use it. The first thing we'll want to do is set up our billing automation rules in Fortapay. So we covered this in a previous video, but we recommend setting up several automation rules or billing automation rules here. And we'll use our first example of the initial invoice notice. So I've set this rule up in Fortapay, and it's based on having an unpaid invoice. I gave it a name, and then I want this to be triggered or sent within 1 hour of the invoice creation date. So that's what's happening. So as soon as an invoice gets created within the hour, we're going to trigger this rule. Now I can come down here and I can choose what I want to have happen. And I'm going to talk about these two options. So the first one is I can apply a tag or I can trigger this with a campaign goal. So if I come back to my campaign here, you'll notice we have this tag. I would simply just note what this tag is, which is the initial invoice notification. I can come into Fortapay under that automation rule, and under the triggers here, our initial invoice notification start. So when this rule finds an open invoice, it will apply this tag, which will then start this campaign right here. And we'll talk about the rest of the setup. So that's one way to trigger this invoice notice. The other way, and I think is very useful, is using campaign goals. This is a little cleaner than using tags and quite easy to set up as well. So with these API goals, you'd want to use probably just one of these in this rule. You don't want to use both. If I chose for the API goal, I would simply copy this call name right here over to my Fortapay rule, and that'll be the goal call. And then the integration, this is important. The integration is not going to be XYZ. It's going to be the name of my Infusionsoft app. In this case, KC143. I would paste that there, hit save. Now this goal is ready, and I'll come over to my rule and I'm going to paste that there. And if I hit save, now what happens is this initial invoice notice will trigger every time there's a new invoice within the hour of it being created. And when that does, it's going to start this Fortapay campaign, Infusionsoft campaign here. This API goal will launch. And then let's talk about the rest of what's going on here. So initially, this is just a blank. We don't need to worry about this. All this does is simplify our decision diamond logic a little bit here. So the configuration that we'll need to do is set up these emails. So the main one here being the initial invoice notice. If I come into this campaign, you'll see there's this email that needs to be configured, and I need to configure it with a Fortapay link. So if I come in here, we'll see I've got this view invoice, but this needs to be configured. So I want to choose URL. And then here we'll go back to my Fortapay admin. I'll go under Infusionsoft links. And now I get to choose where I want to send this customer when they click view invoice. I can log them in automatically to the overview page, which again would just send them right. This is the customer view of Wiley here. It would send them right here. I could also send them straight to the invoice list. That would be the second option here. In fact, in this case, that's what I want to do. So I'll grab this. In fact, one of the other features I can do is add this little parameter here. So I'll go ahead and do that as well. So he'll be taken right to the invoice list, and he'll only see the invoices that are unpaid. So if I paste this, again, I want to change that from all to unpaid. Now it's going to show just the unpaid invoices. We've got his merge field of the contact email address as well as the contact ID, and it looks correct with my appropriate subdomain. So this is ready to go. That's all that's needed. I can customize any of the text that's needed for the email or the subject line. And then I can set this email ready, come back here, and then set my campaign to ready. So that's all that's needed for sending out an invoice. And every time that there's a new open invoice, that automation rule that we set up in Fortapay will find that invoice and send out a notice, and the customer will get an email with a link to their invoice. Now, there is another option here I wanted to mention. So sometimes there's this scenario where maybe two people need to get a copy of the invoice. You might have the business owner, or they might have an accountant, or you might want to send it to somebody other than the primary contact. That's what this uh, email to is here. And so with this, I would do the same thing. I would just configure this email the same way I did with the previous one. We're going to choose URL. We can paste that information there. And again, we'll do unpaid here. Okay, so this email is also ready to go out. And in the scenario where I want to send this to somebody other than the primary contact, this can be quite helpful. I would set that to live, and that's ready to go. So I would want to do this for each of the different kinds of rules that we have set up. So in this case, I have my initial invoice notice, and I have that working, and that's all configured. Coming down here, we've also set up for 3 other types of notices. Another would be a courtesy reminder. These are set up the same way, including the API goal. So in this case, under my rule, let's go through this. I would have my courtesy reminder here. And again, if I use my API goal, I would simply come down and paste that there, update our integration name with case, in this case, KC143. Come back here, hit save. Now this one runs a little bit different. I'm going to have this trigger initially 15 days after the invoice was created. So this is, again, just a follow-up reminder if the invoice hasn't been paid. And then I want this to happen every time, every 10 days thereafter. So it would actually happen 3 times. It would happen on day 15, day 25, and day 35. So I'll save that. And every time that that one runs, it will come through and start this courtesy reminder. And I would configure these emails the exact same way. So I would come in here, select this, and choose where I wanted to send them. So maybe under this example, I want to send them to the overview page. So I can just copy that link and save that there, and that's good to go. And I can set that email to be ready. I wouldn't recommend adding like timers and other emails that you would send here, because if that invoice does get paid, let's say we put in a delay timer here, and then we wanted to add another email to go out. Okay, this is certainly possible and a way to do this. The problem is if I do something like this, if in the interim between when this delay timer is running, let's wait a week, and then we send out this other email notice here. If I did it and designed it this way, then if the customer came in and paid, it's not going to know to stop this campaign. So I recommend not doing this, and instead simply allowing the one email to go out, and then we'll just have them cycle through every time that automation rule fires. So they'll get that notice. And then I could likewise set that up for email 2. With email 2, let's talk about. So let's say Wiley was my contact here, and these invoices would be sent to the primary email address right here. But let's say Wiley had an assistant that was actually handling getting the bills paid, and I'd want to send it to that assistant. Well, under email address 2 here, I could have the assistant get the email address, right? So, or get the invoice. And so I could save that there, and then these campaigns or these emails could go to email number 2. Now, to do that, there we do have a form that we've set up, and we'll cover this in more detail in another video. But basically, when I'm here, I can come down to my internal forms, and I could choose Fortapay actions. And under this, there's the option to send invoices to email 2. So if I only wanted it sent to invoice email number 2, I could simply hit save. That will apply a tag that takes care of sending the invoice to email number 2. Or if I wanted it to go to both email 1 and 2, then we could have it set that way, and it would send to both Wiley and his assistant in this case. So that's why we have the option to send a second invoice to another party. The same process I would go through for as many steps as I wanted here. We could send out an escalated reminder, maybe with a little stronger language, saying, hey, we need to get this invoice taken care of, or otherwise we're stopping working with you or canceling your account. And then if you have a collections policy, you can indicate kind of the same thing here. With the collections, we also indicate a few tasks that you might want to create for staff to follow up or send out letters. But the same option would apply here, where we could follow up based on the trigger firing in Fortapay. So that covers this campaign. This is one of the more involved campaigns to set up, but it really just consists of triggering these goals to start the campaign based on our billing automation rules that we want to have in place, and then configuring the emails with the actual links to what you want to have happen for the invoice. If I want to send them to the invoice list, if I want to send them to the overview page, we just need to configure the links for that. So that summarizes the information for the Open Invoice Notice campaign.